All right, good afternoon and good evening and good night to all of you listeners out there during this wonderful Holy Week. Welcome back to the We Shall Not Sleep podcast. Thank you so much for joining us and really setting some time aside during Holy Week to hopefully be edified tonight. This is the goal of every podcast episode, but especially during Holy Week, a time of reflection and commemoration for Jesus' life, death, and resurrection. For many of us, this is a really busy week, but for us Christians, this is our Super Bowl week, and we celebrate the fact that Jesus came to Jerusalem not on a M1 Abrams tank, not in chariots of fire. He came to subvert the expectations of those people that placed upon him their own version of what they wanted the kingdoms of this world to look like, and instead, he certainly educated them on what God's vision for the kingdom of heaven is going to be, both now and forevermore. And he did this with the triumphal entry, with him coming on a donkey, a symbol of peace, not as a threat to Rome, but a threat to the Pharisees, the Sadducees, those, even his own people, who thought that he was going to free them from the Roman captors. Not so much. And so that's what Palm Sunday is. We take palm branches and we wave them as we sing, as we celebrate and remember Christ's triumphal entry. And then we have a couple of days break for a lot of people. For traditional and Eastern churches, there's a lot of things going on. But here in the West, we have a Maundy Thursday service, which celebrates the Last Supper, a Good Friday, which is the reason why we call it Good Friday is because it is indeed a Good Friday because we do celebrate Christ's resurrection. And then we have Holy Saturday, a time of reflection, of quietness, as we remember that Christ descended into hell and he preached the gospel in hell. And then Resurrection Sunday. So tonight, between now and next week, I want us to be focusing on a couple things because of what Easter is. I want us to go to John chapter 13 first of all, and I want to read verses 1 through 7. And this is the Lord's Supper. From the Gospel of John chapter 13 starting at verse 1. It says, "Now before the feast of the Passover, Jesus, knowing that his hour had come, that he would depart out of this world to the Father, having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end." I love that. He loved them to the very end. "During supper, the devil having already put into the heart of Judas Iscariot, the son of Simon, to betray him, Jesus, knowing the Father had given all things into his hands, and that he had come forth from God and was going back to God, got up from supper and laid aside his garments, and taking a towel, he girded himself. Then he poured water into the basin and began to wash the disciples' feet, and to wipe them with the towel which he was girded. So he came to Simon Peter, he said to him, Lord, do you wash my feet? Jesus answered and said to him, what I do to you now, what I do, you do not realize now, but you will understand hereafter. And I'll pause there, and we'll go on to another section here. But what's so important about this is that there are some times that God either asks us to do something or moves in our lives, and we fully don't understand the purpose of it in that exact moment. Sometimes it is hidden from us why exactly things are happening the way that they are. And that's okay. Sometimes we don't have to know. But in our world, our consumeristic world that we live in here in the West, if we're going to get an investment, we have to know what the payoff is, right? We have to know, like, well, when am I going to get my ROI? How much do I expect to receive? These are questions that us Americans, I think, ask innately now based on our culture and how much it's been inundated within us. So sometimes when we don't have an answer, it's considered a pejorative. It's considered a negative situation that we don't have an answer for why we are doing something or why Jesus may have asked us to do something or God put something in our way. We might not always have those particular things in mind, and that is okay. So that's the first lesson. You don't always have to know. Second one, Matthew 26, verses 17 through 30. It says, Now on the first day of unleavened bread, the disciples came to Jesus and asked, Where do you want us to prepare for you to eat the Passover? And he said, Go into the city to a certain man and say to him, The teacher says, My time is near. I am to keep the Passover at your house with my disciples. The disciples did as Jesus had directed them, and they prepared the Passover. Now, when evening came, Jesus was reclining at the table with the 12 disciples. As they were eating, he said, "Truly I say to you that one of you will betray me." Being deeply grieved, they each one began to say to him, "Surely not I, Lord." And he answered, "He who dipped his hand with me in the bowl is the one who will betray me," which was all of them, by the way. "The Son of Man is to go, just as it is written of him. But woe to that man by whom the Son of Man is betrayed. It would have been good for that man if he had not been born." And Judas, who was betraying him, said, "Surely it is not I, Rabbi." Jesus said to him, "You've said it yourself." While they were eating, Jesus took some bread, and after a blessing, he broke it and gave it to the disciples and said, "Take, eat, this is my body." And when he had taken a cup and given thanks, he gave it to them, saying, "Drink from it, all of you. For this is my blood of the covenant, which is poured out for many for forgiveness of sins. But I say to you, I will not drink of this fruit of the vine from now on until that day when I drink it new with you in my Father's kingdom." After singing a hymn, they went out to the Mount of Olives. And what this is really instituting is, what are we commemorating? So tomorrow it's looking at feet washing. It's Jesus taking upon himself the posture of a servant. The posture of a servant. This whole notion that Jesus, being divine, God himself in human form, models to us how we ought to act towards one another. So you have this initial act of saying in the supper, you have this horizontal relationship established. This is how you ought to treat one another, love one another, by serving one another and washing each other's feet. And then he says, well, here's now what I'm doing for you. My body's going to be broken. My blood is going to be shed for the forgiveness of sins so that you may be forgiven and then therefore justified before my Father in heaven. That's the only way that we're justified. It's nothing through us, right? Now, the third aspect about Jesus is now the relationship, not from each other. You have the relationships of what they're supposed to do, what he does for them, and then what his posture is then towards God. And the openness that he has with the Father. And he gives this amazing, most spectacular prayer after the high priestly prayer in John, which is also beautiful. He asks one of the most important things here. Let me get it here. This is going to be taken out of Matthew 26, if you want to turn there with me. Matthew 26, starting at verse 36. This is him in the Garden of Gethsemane, verses 46. Then Jesus came with them to a place called Gethsemane, and Jesus said to his disciples, "Sit here while I go over there and pray." And he took with him Peter and the two sons of Zebedee and began to be grieved and distressed. Then he said to them, "My soul is deeply grieved to the point of death. Remain here and keep watch with me." And when he went a little beyond them, he fell on his face and prayed, saying, "My Father, if it is possible, let this cup pass from me. Yet not as I will, but as you will." And then he goes back, of course, and he finds the disciples sleeping. And he says, "Are you kidding me? You can't stay awake." Verse 42, he went away again a second time and prayed, saying, "Father, if this cannot pass unless I drink it, your will be done." And then he comes back and they're still sleeping, and then that's when they come and arrest him. But twice he's saying, this wrath of God that was in this cup. What was in this cup? It was the wrath of God. He's knowing, what is he grieved by? The separation that's from the Father, what sin would ultimately do. The Father turns his face away from the Son so that he could be scorned, that he could be mocked and ridiculed, and then eventually die. God cannot look upon sin. It is the antithesis of him. And so he turns his own face away from his Son to shame. Jesus takes all of that upon himself. What does Jesus fear? He fears the separation. You know what I say? A fear. When I say that's not time his divinity, I'm talking about his humanity, his full humanity, what we as Christians believe. Why is he in agony? Why is he grieved? My soul is deeply grieved to the point of death. Why is he grieved? It's the separation from the Father. But yet it's the most human moment Jesus ever lives, I believe, lives out in the Gospels, is that he is modeling to us how we ought to serve one another. He's telling them that here's what's going to happen for you, and now my relationship as I model it then to back to my Heavenly Father, what we do when we recite the Lord's Prayer, remember when he taught us to pray, then it's thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. It's this submission prayer of not my will, thy will be done. Jesus teaches us to pray that. He prays it himself, and then he does it. And in the midst of the temptation, remember, he's offered the entire world. Satan offers him the entire world, is even tempted again, mocked on the cross when he says, well, if you're the Son of Man, why don't you just come down from there? Right? Why don't you call out your holy angels? Call upon Elijah. What are you, a wuss or something? These are the people making fun of him. And he refuses that temptation and goes to death, obedient unto death, even death on a cross. This is what it's all about. Jesus, the best leader in history. Don't. Next time you're tempted to watch a motivational speech on leadership, can we just go read Matthew, the book of Matthew, Mark, Luke, books of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and look at leadership? Whether you think Jesus is just a moral teacher or not, I mean that's heretical anyway. But for the people who are not Christians, like, this is the best model of leadership. Let's just say that he's a literary character. He always does what he commands his followers to do. He never once commanded his followers to do something that he would never once do himself. That's just not in Jesus' lexicon or in his tool bag. No, because he eventually is obedient on the cross. He's saying, for us then, what are we to take away? Is that we might have our wants and desires, and we can petition God on that behalf. We can petition, we can go to God and say, hey, I really don't want this to happen. Here are the reasons why. You're my Father in heaven. You hear me when I cry to you. I'm your child. You've loved me. You created me. You want what's best for me. Therefore, I am praying for deliverance out of this thing. However, if it is your will that I somehow have to endure this, then let your glory be shined. Let me become less. You become more. Your grace is sufficient. This is me working out my salvation. And therefore, God's glory can be made manifest in all circumstances, because it's going to be anyway. He just wants us to be participants in that instead of roadblocks. Sometimes that goes against what we want in that moment. But we're talking about joy, and joy eternal in the heavens, which is, again, made not by human hands, but by God's hands. That's the prize. So we look at Jesus' posture in the garden, like, that's it, man. That is what this is all about. My feelings, my wants, my desires, which are all God-given in a lot of circumstances. God gave us emotion. God has given us desires. God's given us the ability to communicate with him. Are we still, though, also willing to say, even in my short-sightedness where we can't create the next day, we can't walk on water, the winds and waves do not obey our circumstances. If you live in Michigan, it's been a very windy spring, and I'm just tired of the wind, and I just yell at the wind to stop. I don't have that type of power. Therefore, if I can't even predict what's going to happen tomorrow, why don't I just leave it in the hands of the one who is going to form and create tomorrow? Now, this could be grandstanding by a lot of some. It's like, Michael, that's really easy to say. Yeah, it's very easy to say. It's very difficult to live out because it takes a tremendous amount of discipline and trust. When you surrender to Jesus, it does not guarantee a life without trouble. Your life's already full of trouble, right? What do you got to lose? What do we hope to really control in our lives anymore? How is it working for us? People are stressed. People are angry. People feel a great deep sense of injustice. And yet, if it's up to humans to fix it, I mean, well, we're in this mess to begin with, right? All of these themes are seen in the cross. I pray that you just receive that. I pray that you can look upon that in a different light and appreciate it for what it is. So thank you very much for considering this. Look again, go back to John 13. Look at these chapters in Matthew I went over, and look at that horizontal relationship, how Jesus asks us to serve one another, what he then did for us by being on the cross, and then before he went there, he is asking to be delivered, but he says, not my will, thy will be done, Father. It's that simple. I hope this time at Easter is transformative for you. I hope it's a place of a place and a time of sure edification, and that we can all celebrate together as Christians all the time, knowing that Christ is already resurrected. We're celebrating the commemoration. because we're already living in a post-resurrection era. We already know how this ends. The good book tells us so. May that be your anchor in living hope. May God bless you, and may God keep you. Happy Easter. He is risen.